Paradox. So I remember like listening to it and thinking like, wow, these guys sound like just like early 80s Holdsworth. And at first I thought, okay, this is really impressive. And then I immediately thought, that's depressing. You're just doing like karaoke.
Yeah.
You know? And so that made me think, I just got to figure out a way to do my thing. And I kind of figured out early on, like, I'm not a virtuosic guitar player. I feel like some people pick things up very easily, very quickly. Guitar always felt like a very like big challenge, a steep mountain for me to climb. And then when I got into trying to like learn about theory, I was just like, oh my God, I don't understand this shit at all. You know, like I faked my way through music. Well, for my whole life, but especially through like middle school, I was playing like clarinet.
Yeah. Wait, oh man, some people look like they play certain instruments, and I don't know if you look like you played the clarinet. I'm very surprised.
Believe me, I didn't play the clarinet. I held one in my hands, but to say that I played it with any skill whatsoever would be a overstatement. I mean, they would literally put, sheet music in front of me, and I'd just be like, cool.
Interesting.
I really just like was faking my way through it. I didn't learn and I didn't learn anything, I learned how to fake my way through it.
Right.
So in the context of like producing records, I always look at things like I want to play with people who are better than me, which is not necessarily that high of a bar. But I really want to make sure that like I'm learning, and that I'm never kind of like pursuing an end goal with my kind of like ego being elevated.
Right.
It's about what are we accomplishing corporately together, I want to do like the best thing together.
Yeah.
And so I'm always extremely judicious with the places where I like insert myself, because I know that I'm playing, usually with like some heavy hitters. So I either feel like I need to rise to the occasion, or I need to kind of like be a supporting character, like when you're playing in a group with like Kathleen Pineda, the level of like what you are going to articulate in your solo needs to be pretty high.
Yeah.
Because she's gonna like clown you.
For sure.
Right?
She's
not on purpose.
No,
Again, it's not a competition.
She's the real deal, yeah.
But there is a beautiful thing that happens when you put all the musicians in a room together, and then you hear what someone else does, and you're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Damn it.
You fucking did that to me.
I know.
Is that,
that's what I was thinking about.
Oh my God, that was such a crazy day. That was, how many people did we have in here? Like 14?
Something like that, yeah. Full string section, drums, percussion, Stuart on electric bass, Kathleen on piano, Jeff Parker and I on guitars.
And there's me, Anthony, and Chris McCarthy in the string section.
Right. All live.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And we like just figured the structures out,
Day of.
10, 15, 20 minutes before we recorded the songs. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That was
the Psychic Temple and Cholo and Cinco.
Yeah, that was monumental. It was crazy. But yeah, I remember you were calling out solo order, and I was like, don't you do it. Don't you do it. And it's like, Kathleen solos and then Phil. Damn it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, I definitely thought about how I was going to play that solo way differently after hearing what she played. And it's, man, you have these experiences where you play with people and it elevates the musicianship of everybody in the room. And you put lots of people like that in a room, and the tide rises significantly.
Yeah.
You get crazy people like Danny Frankel who, like, something accidentally falls off of his percussion table, so he knocks the entire fucking thing over.
Right.
Like, on purpose.
Which happened on that same song, I think. On that same take.
Yeah. Just all these little moments of, I don't know, creation and accidental genius, and I don't know. It's there's nothing quite like being in a room full of people like that. It's wild.
I feel like a lot of people insulate themselves from those moments because even though they listen to music that has that risk-taking in it, they are so caught up in their own thing that they don't themselves want to participate in something that requires that much being put on the line.
Yeah, it's much safer to sit in your own room and just perfect the one thing you've been trying to work on forever and ever. I personally, I think I'd go crazy. Like,
of course,
working on music like that in a vacuum has got to be. You lose all sense of perspective and objectivity. Like, at that point, you might as well just fix everything, because there's.
I think very few people are actually even good at it. It's like, it's that exception proves the rule kind of thing where it's like, oh, well, look at Stevie Wonder. Oh, look at Prince.
Yeah.
Oh, look at, Paul McCartney, Square Pusher. There's like a few people who could like play all of these different instruments.
Yeah.
And, actually, and then also understand how to write a song.
Yeah.
And sing. Well, not Square Pusher, but everybody, all these other cats,
Yeah.
But, and then people kind of like obsess over that.
Yeah.
And then it's almost because I don't know, there's a psychological thing that happens, I think, where it's easier to ascribe genius to one person than an ensemble. And for me, I think if, maybe you listen to records that I produce or my own music, I'm always just like thinking of the ensemble. Like, I don't. It's like, maybe I'm writing the tunes, or I'm helping arrange stuff, or it's done at my studio or with a similar group of musicians. But I'm just thinking like the song, the band, the group. I want people to be excited. I want it to be something worth listening to.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything worse than like having to do all of that shit myself. and maybe it's because I can't too, that I have such a strong desire to bring all these other people in. It was that kind of Holdsworthian experience of knowing like, I can't do this, but I still want to do great shit.
Yeah. No, limitations are sort of almost necessary for creative things to happen. I always think about, everybody, we talk about Star Wars for a very short period of time. I'll get out of it very quickly.
Oof, I'm going to time you.
Okay, so I think the reason that the original trilogy of Star Wars was great was because no one thought it was worth anything. Like, Lucas had like no leash to do what he wanted. It had to be like cut down. It had to be gutted. Like every little piece of fat had to be cut off of it. Yeah, and then
the big picture.
Not even him. There's a great set of videos on YouTube about how Star Wars was saved in the edit.
Oh, okay.
And there's his wife and oh gosh, I can't remember the second guy's name. Basically saved that movie in the editing room, like cutting out all these things that didn't need to be there, recutting certain things to make the flow work. But after Star Wars became this huge fucking thing, everyone just assumed, George Lucas can do no wrong, just do whatever you want. And then it becomes this sort of like lumbering mass of whatever.
I didn't even see those three new movies.
Don't worry about it. You don't have to do it.
I do know that I don't know a lot about Star Wars. But I know that a lot of people think the second one is the best one because it's the only one Lucas didn't direct.
Irving Kershner directed it. Right. Yeah, and it's a character study. Yeah, it's a totally different kind of look at the universe.
Yeah.
But you need and that's the other difficulty with working in a vacuum is like working on this stuff without other human interaction and perspective.
Yeah.
You sort of lose something in the creative process.
It's so funny too because making a movie is so similar to making a record, or theater. I think of all of those practices require a huge group of disparate and talented people, you know, like you need a guy who's like, you need a great drummer, just like you need like a great, you know, camera op or cinematographer
or gaffer
or right
or best boy or other film terms. I don't know what they mean.
But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Just like you need a great engineer, you need a great producer, you need a great songwriter, you need a great script writer or screenwriter, you know? And I think one of the funny things is that, and I think about this a lot with, you know, with music when we're talking about kind of the idea of like the one genius, the auteur kind of concept. And I subscribe to it to a certain degree, but I use a kind of like a mathematical, scientific equation for that. I always think, okay, I've never articulated this before.
I was gonna say I've heard a lot of schlarp theories, but this is a new one on me.
So I always think, let's say, I don't know why I'm thinking of Fleetwood Mac. Let's take Fleetwood Mac. Maybe they're a good example. We'll see how my explanation goes. When you get to when like Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined the band, you essentially have the same rhythm section that had been on the previous records, right? Mick Fleetwood, Christine McVie, John McVie. But then you add Lindsey and Stevie, and then the first record, the self-titled Fleetwood Mac record, has a couple of big hits on it. Then Rumors, everybody knows.
Yeah.
Then Tusk. Then things kind of start to slide down a little bit. Mirage. And then I kind of actually recently rediscovered how good Tango in the Night is.
Oh, really? I bailed.
I actually bought that record on cassette when it came out, just to give you an idea of like how long I've been a music nerd.
Oh my God.
I bought that, Invisible Touch, and I Just Want to Have Some Fun by Samantha Fox, all on cassette tape.
Hey, Invisible Touch is. I dig that record, man.
Yeah, it was maybe like the last listenable Genesis record.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my kind of going back to my little theory is, you can sort of tell who is the real catalyst.
Right.
Who are, you know, now I know that it has a lot to do with like the ensemble, but I do think, you know, you take out Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and obviously the band is very different.
Yeah.
If you take them both out, you have their pre-success.
Yeah, they're just like a blues band. Yeah.
Right. Then you add them in there, and all of a sudden, it's not a coincidence, right? It's kind of like there is a magic there. All this stuff works. Then you kind of take them out again, and you're kind of like, oh, or let's say you check out some of Stevie Nicks' solo records, and you're kind of like, there's a good song or two
here and there,
here, right? I just finished a biography about Stevie Nicks, actually, so maybe that's why I'm thinking about it. And, you know, they talk about that song Stand Back, which is like this great kind of anthemic, like 80s dance pop kind of tune. And of course, like, her sense of melody and harmony is really interesting and unique. But she never really made another song like Stand Back. And part of the reason that song's so great is that like Prince played the synths on it. So like the synth tones and the kind of some of the parts, it's like, oh, well, Prince, you know, like Stevie she's got a thing. Prince has a thing, and you put that combo together, and it's like, oh wow, like this is a great collaboration. I don't want to like go too far afield here, but then I think, you know, you go to like an early like Lindsey Buckingham record, and you hear a lot of the same kind of little magical things that are present on those Fleetwood Mac records, but then you also kind of don't get like the Stevie sense of melody,
right?
You know what I mean? So anyway, I guess my point is like, I think yes, the auteur theory is like ever present, and you know, there's only only one Brian Wilson.
Yeah.
And
there's only one Joni.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's only one Dylan, Neil Young, so on and so forth. They quite often, though, are the common denominator, but even they do bad work, you know what I mean? And part of it's because they take risks that a lot of other people don't take, you know?
Yeah.
But I always just look at it, you know, my kind of little scientific thing is like, oh, just take this person out and look what they did on their own. Is it still of that same caliber, you know?
Right.
I gotta work on that, articulating that a little bit.
Refine it.
Yeah, I gotta refine that. But I do think that sort of maybe like in kind of keeping with that line of discussion, I do, every once in a while I go back and I listen to records that we've done and I hear a kind of like through line because, you know, of your playing or a kind of like on a certain kind of like ensemble vibe. And it's funny because I've had a lot of people tell me like over the years like, oh, I know when it's like one of your songs or I know when it's, you know, like you wrote a melody or whatever.
Yeah, there's always a certain sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say angularity, but there's always some sort of jump that I wasn't, there's something I wasn't expecting usually when I hear a melody that you wrote, and I'm sort of like, oh, yeah, that's Chris.
I'd be curious to know on a, you know, theoretical level if I'm basically just doing the same jump in every song.
Hey, it's okay. I mean,
you know what I'm saying?
No, I mean, a lot of classical musicians would sort of stick stuff like that into their compositions. Like Shostakovich would, what is that motif in? Oh, geez, it's like the 8th string quartet. It's this movement. It's D, E flat, C, B, D, 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 D. But a lot of times back in the day, they were writing these things in German notation. So those notation would actually read D, S, C, H, which is basically him just writing his signature in musical notation.
Really?
Bach would do similar things, and they would show up in all of these different little places.
The Germans, man.
Yeah. So you would just, no, you're just sort of, it's your calling card.
My lineage.
Yeah.
Just to do the same thing over and over again. Who knows? I've thought about that before. I'm like, I don't want to know if I'm doing that.
Yeah, sometimes it's better. Sometimes it's better just to do it because it sounds good.
I just keep going.
It feels right.
Anyway, I didn't mention that to talk about myself.
Yeah.
I mentioned it because when I hear a lot of records that we've done, I now hear like your sense of rhythm on piano, for example, a kind of like just your personality. You know, I've always heard it in your fiddle playing,
right?
But it's sort of like ever present. You know, and I was listening to like I think it's your Mando playing on the Houses of the Holy Volume 1.
Oh, yeah.
And it made me think about like, you know, your Mando playing on like Leanne's record. And there are just certain things that maybe like, if we're being critical of ourselves, we may think like, oh, I don't want to repeat this thing in my playing.
Yeah.
But, and I get that because I challenge myself with that all the time.
Yeah.
But every once in a while when I hear a certain thing that's not exactly the same, but it calls back to something else, it's a comfort in a way. It's like, oh, right.
I know what that is and
that's
who
Phil's
that is.
Personality coming through in his playing.
That's always a tricky line to try and toe because you want to. I remember when we were on tour, because for some reason you decided you didn't want to take a single damn solo the entire trip, which meant it was just me. I was like, okay, I'm going to try and play something different every night.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to try to.
I didn't take one all tour, did I?
I don't think you did. You sort of was some sort of self-imposed restriction.
Yeah. I remember in Chicago, somebody came up to me like, oh, I was hoping you might take more solos. I was like, why is there anybody out there thinking,
oh my gosh.
Like, thinking about that?
I hope and pray when I go see Schlarb at some weird bar on the east side of Chicago.
He'll take a ripping acoustic guitar solo.
It'd be great. And that crazy hat you bought in Nashville. Amazing. But I think that's something that's difficult to try and manage is sound like developing some sort of musical identity without relying on playing the same lick
Right.
over and over again. And that's something I feel like I'm always trying to do in my playing is like I want to sound like me, and I'm sort of continually trying to figure out what I sound like without being derivative. It's tricky. I feel like most of the artists I love, that's what their sort of careers look like. They sort of do different things as they go on, but they're sort of taking chances and shifting things. I've been thinking about that a lot with the, like early Joni Mitchell records right now.
Yeah.
My wife and I we went to IKEA and bought a big thing to put all of our records in, and it made me realize how many more records I need to buy, because now it looks like we have less because we've organized them.
Right. They weren't just sitting all over the place.
Yeah. So looking at, we've got, what is it? Songs for a Seagull.
Right. Not my favorite Joni record.
Clouds, which is even worse.
Right
I
up
think.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then Ladies of the Canyon.
Now we're starting to cook.
And Blue.
Classic.
But it's really interesting for me to look at those first 3 records and see her like work out these things of like trying to figure out who she is as a songwriter and as a lyricist and as a melody writer, and they sort of all kind of come to fruition. I feel like in Blue,
100%.
like she sort of comes into her own. And then from there on, the records all take crazy different turns. Like Court and Spark is the sort of like pristine chamber pop extravaganza.
Pop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Hissing of Summer Lawns is something completely different. I know that's your jam.
Oh my God. That record changed the way I thought about music. I mean, I'd always been a big Joni fan. And Blue was like maybe the first thing that I was just like, whoa, like, you know, you listen to that in your 20s and there's some kind of like psychic mind meld that it does with you, and you're like, oh, she's singing about what I'm going through right now.
Yeah.
It was like, but it's not trite, and it's not conventional in any way, shape, or form, and the way that she wraps it up in her sense of harmony and melody and rhythm is just kind of like otherworldly. And then you get to like Court and Spark, which, you know, there's a reason that a lot of those songs are still played on the radio. You could walk into Kinko's and hear fucking Free Man in Paris. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
But then Hissing and Hejira, it's just like, oh shit, she did it. Like, she did like all the other shit too, but then she did like it. You know what I mean?
But even through each of those records, which all have incredibly different sonic palettes, she sounds like Joni.
Right. Always.
I mean, she's always going to, because she's a singer, and you sort of sound like yourself when you're a singer. But like, from like a musical substance like perspective, it all sounds like it's coming from the same person and musical mind. It's not like she's playing characters.
No, that's
sometimes
true.
albums feel like you're like, I'm gonna make a, like you're it's like a Broadway show. You're coming out in different costumes.
I mean, I think, you know, I think Dylan is kind of like that. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think Nashville Skyline, it's like, that's a character.
Yeah.
Like John Wesley Harding, like some of these records, he's sort of like adopting a new persona.
Yeah.
On purpose.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
Know, but with Joni, I always felt like it was her.
Yeah,
and there's and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with one way or the other. I think both are like equally valid artistic pursuits, you know. But it's almost like with Joni, like I remember, I always thought of like Hissing as like even the subject matter, and I sort of think of this a little bit with Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. Like nobody was really writing about those things then. Yeah. And you know,
there's some song on Hissing of Summer Lawns that's just about like a pimp.
Yeah, Ethan the Kingpin.
Yeah.
I mean, who's writing about?
But it's like this sort of, it's like this very sentimental, like sort of.
It's kind of it's almost like a verite look at like, whoa, like how. You know, it's sympathetic, but not sappy or romantic. You know, it has a tension to it, and a sadness. but there's just this kind of like, to me, on that record, I almost felt like Joni was kind of like presaging some of the subject matter of like gangster rap and rap music that wouldn't come around and be articulated for another like 5-6 years, because I think Hissing was like 75 or something. But she's talking about kind of like street shit, you know what I mean? But then she's also talking about mansions and having money and swimming in your big fancy pool, and the kind of like alienation that comes with like then being rich.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, shit, she was fucking sampling drummers before anybody
This is
sampled
what I'm saying,
drummers.
man.
Yeah.
That the Jungle Line is like so progressive.
Yeah.
Because it's got like the Burundi drummer sample, and then she's just playing like a weird acoustic guitar and like a Moog bass line.
Yeah.
What? Who's doing that then? I mean, it is totally avant-garde.
Yeah.
And I think the album sales for that record kind of, bore that out,
Yeah.
It wasn't what people wanted after Court and Spark.
Totally. Man. Yeah, that record is bananas. It's Hejira's after that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, to me, I think, and I've thought about this a lot. I've talked to my friend Dan Melnick about this too, but I think that it was like a 4-album run, right? From like Blue to Court and Spark to Hissing to Hejira. The artists who had a 4-album run of brilliance like that could probably be counted on like one hand.
Yeah.
I think maybe you could like say Stevie, Miles, Dylan, maybe.
Yeah.
The Beatles. Like,
well, yeah.
You're really talking about like the Mount Everest of artists.
Well, and for each one to be so varied within that
And people
stretch.
forget she produced those records, man. Like,
Yeah, there was somebody like kind of producer in name, right?
Henry Louis was her engineer, sort of co-producer, and he's genius also. And I don't think he gets nearly enough credit. He also like produced / engineered Gilded Palace of Sin by the Flying Burrito Brothers,
yeah.
which is their best record by far, in my opinion, and sonically sounds incredible, which is, again, not a coincidence. This goes back to my auteur thing, right?
Right.
Take these people out, and it's like they keep popping up, and you're like, damn, that record's amazing. I always think of that with like Daniel Lanois and Mark Howard, like, what a coincidence. Here they are producing and engineering and mixing another masterpiece. I wonder why.
Right. Yeah.
How did they wind up here? Well, they're incredible.
Yeah.
That's how. I was talking with Hodges, and I kind of didn't get a chance to talk to him about this as much as I would have liked, but he's kind of talking about like meeting and playing with Tom Waits for a long time, and then working with Mavis for a long time, working with David Lynch, working with all these different people, and I kind of didn't have an opportunity because we were just in the throes of talking about all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence.
Yeah, there sort of seems to be people like have a lot of people in their orbit.
Yeah, but I also there's a kind of they pull. It's a gravitational pull of like greatness.
Yeah,
it's like there's a reason that you've been able to make a living as a musician for 4 years, and it's not because you're just a pleasure to be around or have a good sense of humor or or convince me to drink whiskey.
I am an enabler. That is why some people like hanging out with me, because it's like, Phil get me to do this thing I think I shouldn't do.
I mean, I'd never really drunk any hard liquor in my life until we made Outsider.
I will for sure hang that on my proverbial hat rack of accomplishments.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was we got you to go out drinking in Lexington. No, was it Louisville? Lexington, Kentucky.
That's right. Yeah.
I've never seen you at a bar that we weren't being forced to play at, that you didn't want to get the hell out of. And we drank socially for fun.
Yeah.
That was the first time I'd ever seen you do.
Well, it's funny. I had to play a gig at the Love Song a couple weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it was at the end of a long day. And I went up and I was like, they were like, yeah, drinks, on the house or whatever for playing. And I was like, you guys have any like Bullet Rye? And he's like, no, we got this whiskey though. And I was like, all right. And I was like, damn, this shit is good. And I ended up, and I kind of needed it, like, so I didn't start drinking coffee till I was like in my like mid 30s. And I didn't start drinking alcohol till, we made Outsider.
Yeah.
So that would be what, late 30s?
Yeah. You're just discovering life as you get older.
All of these doors just continue to open for me. I'm a late bloomer, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was funny because every once in a while, Adriana, I think, is very grateful that you introduced me to it. 'Cause if there's anybody who could use, a little bit of calming down every once in a while.
It's probably you.
Calm down.
Oh my God.
And I did. I ended up having a drink, and I ended up having a great show. I was kind of worked up about it all day, and I was just kind of like, oh man, I got to work all day, and then drive out to LA, and then drive back and figure out a set list, and then go back to LA to play the show. And I ended up having that, having a drink, and I was
What was it? Do you remember what the drink?